Okay, it looks like we're on again. This is Ben at Church Universal and Triumphant. I started a couple of days ago. I'm trying to think. Well, I started to make a video a couple of days ago, and there were technical problems, so it didn't continue. But here, I am going to be taking up again the cause of the for the canonization of Elizabeth Clare Prophet, to the point that that's relevant to the church. I think it's relevant because it's topically relevant now in the moment, because I sort of have stated as much. Um, Really, I suppose that ultimately, whether or not we go forward with this really depends upon the needs of everybody within the church, and also the fulfillable needs of the people who need to be helped now. I don't want to waste time, but generally, um, I hold quite a balance karmically for other people within the church, and what makes me feel better theologically, I think, is helpful. That's been my experience, is that my mission and effort as I push forward is what is meaningful for everybody. So I have a picture of Erin up right now. I'm looking at the Young Center lecture, so I have that sort of in my heart and my consciousness presently. She's doing some interesting work. It's controversial work, and I understand the nature of the controversy. But for me personally, it has been meaningful and supportive. So I want to refer to that periodically as well. But what I have, the present effort is to determine what the procedures are and what the customs are within the Roman Catholic Church in terms of determining whether or not a person should be beatified. Beatification is the first step towards sainthood. Before becoming a saint, one is beatified. One is determined to be what is known as blessed. I'm not sure exactly. There are a number, I'm certain, who are considered to be blessed presently. I think all are deceased. I don't think that they will say blessed for someone who hasn't actually left physical embodiment. I do take exception to that. I think that there are living saints in the world, and I refer to Elizabeth Clare Prophet, as a saint, and I know of staff at Church Universal and Triumphant, ranch staff, who also said that these are people who are either reverends now or who are no longer in embodiment as reverends. But uh, I was inspired when I heard one couple in particular refer to her as a living saint. The question, it was kind of and of course, I know that she is greatly revered and called the messenger, but the impression that I developed early on when I entered the church was that, well, it's not at all the same thing as being a really good priest or even a really inspiring nun necessarily. There are powerful nuns. Of course, Mother Teresa is considered. I'm trying to think if she's a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. She must be, right? But she's definitely considered an ascended master within the church here. But there are all sorts of really great, holy, powerful leaders, and it's not really the same thing as being considered to be a saint. And my proposal is that Elizabeth Clare Prophet was a living saint. So let's take a look at what is going on in the Roman Catholic Church. What I'm after right now is, do they have to? And I mean, I've seen it delineated. There are a number of criteria that need to be met. And what I'm after right now is, do they have to? Does one have to have performed a certain number of miracles? Does one have to have stigmata? All of those questions. I don't think that they actually have to show blood. There's different. The stigmata is there are different kinds of stigmata. Um, but what exactly? How does the process unfold, and what exactly has to be determined in order for that to pass? If you refer to my other video and as a supporting reference for this, um, I did make a video on Saint Francisco, who was one of the witnesses, and there is a video of me talking about the scapular medal and describing the Catholic scapular medal, and refer to that. Additionally, although it's a lot to slog through, admittedly, when you get there, it's kind of an unwieldy video. But near the end of the video, and I'll provide you a bookmark to it if you want to send me a let's see, just private message to me, and I'll send you a bookmark to it. It's the video entitled "The Miracle of Fatima," I believe. I'm trying to think if that's accurate or not. Yeah, it is. But I start talking about my experience within the church, interacting with people in Sri Lanka, and interacting with who are not even a part of CUT, but interacting with the Theravadins of the world, different and the other branches of Buddhism and so forth. I discussed that in there, but if you want to cut right to the part about Fatima, it's relevant because I will give detailed information about the canonization process in that video. But it's a 2 to 3 hour video, and at the end you will see I start to discuss the beatification process specifically for Francisco. Lucia is now saint too. I don't know that they have. Jacinta must be blessed. There are 3 children. I'm trying to think. It's a brother and a sister and a cousin, and I'm pretty sure that Lucia was the cousin, and Jacinta and Francisco were brother and sister. I think I have that right. I'll research it. But Francisco's canonization review is fascinating for its relevance to Church Universal and Triumphant for reasons that I explained in that video. The language that was issued by the Roman Catholic Church is statistically to be found very often within Church Universal and Triumphant dialogue and nowhere else. If you look at the reference to that, they're describing the luster of a pearl when they talk about the sun coming down. They say pearl. They say at one point they say the color was violet. So they talk about our they're using our language when they discuss the sainthood of Francisco. It's fascinating, and I'm stating it awkwardly, and I'm sure there's a very deft way of putting it, but I don't presently have the resources to embark on that. Additionally, I just am here to provide you with the link to the Roman Catholic determinative process. Let's see here. So I'm going to go to the site right now, but to plug Aaron's work for a minute, and for people who are new, I think it's fair to say, and please forgive me if I'm not putting anything accurately, that the story goes, the best of my understanding, the unfoldment goes, that Erin initially supported her mother's work. She co-wrote, at least 2 books with Elizabeth Clare Prophet. She had a hand I believe she had a hand in the book on Issa, on Jesus in India. And I'm not sure, additionally, about Jesus' travels into India and into what was known as Ladakh, which is an intersection of 4 different modern-day countries. What I say is that Jesus knelt, and they say it in the book, Jesus knelt to drink at this particular lake in Ladakh. Now, the Roman Catholic Church doesn't teach that Jesus went that far east, so it differs, and there's controversy about whether these scrolls that were found in a lamasery, a Tibetan lamasery, are authentic, but they refer to a man known as Issa, and people believe that it's Jesus. So it's important information. I did make a separate video on that topic as well, and I'll show you the map in the video that I made on the topic. But Aaron's work, right? So Aaron started off, and I know Aaron's in the sort of the public domain, so I feel more at liberty to discuss what she's doing. Yeah, Tat too, but I'm not sure how much Tat necessarily is interested in my discussing her work at this particular juncture. But all the children are really interesting and have interesting careers, and the grandchildren as well. But Aaron is sort of the public figure when it comes to the theological legacy. I think that's fair to say. But Aaron, if you look at Oprah, Aaron back in the day was defending the church, and now claims to take a more neutral stance regarding her parents' legacy. I'm in the church and fully support holy orders, and I understand the misgivings that people have about church periodically, but I personally have benefited so much from Elizabeth Clare Prophet that I don't really countenance a lot of excessive criticism well, although I maintain an interest in Aaron's work, and I don't find her to be quote-unquote excessively critical, but the story goes that sometimes people within the church have a hard time hearing that things were not always perfect at the ranch. Fair enough. What I have a problem with is when the ranch said that she isn't welcome. At one point, someone at the ranch told that to her, according to her accounting. I have a problem with the children being kept out of the ranch, to be certain, and I think that the priority should be to mend ties with all members and former members, and to also, in my opinion, to correct what I think is undue bad public relations, to put a stop to the public relations that say that really it's the church's fault. I have seen, in my view, based upon my path, which is a holy path, and my labor, which is a sacred labor, Church Universal and Triumphant, has at least for 99.9% of my life been the last organization that I would fault. Is it perfect? No. Is there room for improvement? Yes. And does the balance change? For instance, I have legal battles against big corporations that are doing dangerous things and threatening people that I care about, and it's very important that they're stopped. And it's very important that the U.S. government achieves correction. Additionally, um, it, back when the crimes were being committed against me and against other people, it wasn't Church Universal and Triumphant you'd blame. It was the government, and it was these corporations and this abusive medical oligarchy. Is there a chance now to mend ties at the church and to improve the operation of the church so that we can all proceed together? Possibly, possibly, but I'm not convinced that that's the case. I don't know where to start. But I think that sometimes the unfoldment of the church is best viewed as being organic, which means that sure there are problems periodically, um, but I don't. It has not always been helpful for me to put the criticism of CUT front and center when it comes to what happened to me and correcting the problems for myself, protecting my life. The church is a valuable tool. That's my principal presentation to everybody. Um, it has not done as near as much damage as the organizations it criticizes, and I think that it should be credited for that. However, I do think that if it is able to be brought effectively into the fold of my life, including my career path, it's time to do that. But one way, and as someone was pointing it out on my legal team the other day, my legal team, some of which, some of whom are unfortunately elusive presently. I'm not entirely satisfied with how I have been required to push everything forward. Although it's a very large lawsuit affecting the office of the president on down, of the United States on down, and extending into things like the United Nations and so forth. So it's kind of no wonder that it's so problematic, and it's also reflective of the extent of the damage that was done to me in my early life. But I think that we can all work towards correcting that now by having a loving and constructive approach towards Church Universal and Triumphant. So one of the people who does provide help for me periodically on my legal team pointed out that these lawsuits are relevant. And again, you have to, when you're involved in litigation, the mistake that people make, if they're not attorneys, I think, and sometimes even attorneys make the mistake, is just grabbing a case here, grabbing a case there, and not looking at how things need to logically unfold, and not looking at things like the impact of pursuing this instead of a secondary a different path legally. What someone pointed out to me was that these cases, the mall the Prophet versus Mull versus Prophet case, where there was a counterclaim after CUT sued one of their contractors, bears relevance to my case because it's all relevant now. There's a second case that I found that was, I think, tied into that was put on my desk the other day. It was Prophet, and it was the same thing. There was a counterclaim, or rather, there's a cross. Oh, there's a cross. The CUT once again became cross-defendant after suing. I think it was the same scenario in which CUT sued, they countersued, so it's Prophet versus, then it's the name, and then it's Prophet at the bottom again. So Prophet versus person X, Mr. X, Mrs. X, and then it's the Prophet at the bottom again. I have that too, and I think it ties in, and it's an individual woman, and I don't know the details yet because I haven't read it, but it'd be great to have an opportunity to read that because I think that it's interesting and relevant. So we're talking about the canonization process. Why do this now? Because I think that it's relevant to discuss if Elizabeth Clare Prophet, and as I said in my studied interpretation of soteriology, alchemical reality, all of that, she has, since she bore all of this power, she was so advanced alchemically and was helping so many people karmically, then I think it's important that she's recognized for that. Not for, I misused the term posterity the other day. I think that it does have to do with posterity. But posterity is not necessarily a negative pursuit all the time. Sometimes posterity is necessary so that we can remember someone effectively within a legacy. So to say that, to always say, and I don't think that Aaron makes this presentation, I don't think any of the children and the grandchildren really do, or they shouldn't if they do, but to say that the church never matters, or anybody exterior to CUT, I don't want to pick on the family, the church never matters and so forth, or it's not that important, that Elizabeth wasn't recognized. The reality is, it's important that people are properly positioned within public consciousness so that their work is remembered, and so that when we encounter it, even casually in the newspaper, we are informed in the right direction, because it is part of what I refer to as the living word. If you remember my comment about that from other videos, right? It's vitally important that people are pointed in the right way when it comes to how we remember people. I mean, Abraham Lincoln, if we didn't remember him as being a powerful president who freed the slaves, that's not the entire story, certainly, but if we remembered him as just sort of a secondary nothing president, the whole topic of slavery would be lost to us. So it's important that people are remembered properly, not just in individual families at a local level, but also publicly where warranted. So Elizabeth Clare Prophet, as this world transformer and theologian, I think it's appropriate that the powers that be within the Christian hierarchy understand that she was different and understand exactly the nature of her contribution, which is why I propose that we do this now, and why it's valuable. It's valuable for two reasons. It's valuable because it's valuable for the reason that I stated with regard to legacy and posterity, and it's also valuable because I need something to do other than managing the entire legal case, my personal injury case, in isolation. The isolation was not caused by the church. It was caused by very poor planning early on in this effort, but it does need to be corrected, and I need something to look at other than my problem, and also these other pro bono cases that I have been compelled to undertake. So let's take a look at this for those reasons. Okay, I'm going to go right now. Let me plug two. Okay, to the extent that I mean, a Tap Prophet works on something called Back to Facts, which I think is very important right now. And I don't think she's my friend, and I don't think that there's a problem with including that in this. But unmasking the bias. I benefited from reading that information because what Tatiana is doing is looking at media lies. Okay, people I care about very deeply in my family are not always receptive to the importance of that. The newspapers and what comes down from the government, including these places like the Center for whatever they're calling it, disease control, and I wish they didn't even exist because they are the disease. They are going through and manipulating facts, and so are the newspapers. The newspapers are trying to sell papers to promote advertising, and fear mongering is the best way to get someone to grab a newspaper. And the effect is ultimately that people whose hearts aren't strong, who've been exposed to a lot of trauma, when they see it, even if they logically understand that it's only what's being printed in the paper, quote unquote, it can be devastating. And I'm one of those people whose lives were basically annihilated by bad press. Not bad press about me necessarily, although that's an issue too. If you read my initiating lawsuit, I will explain to people more about my history, encountering lies about me that were printed in the Boston papers and so forth. But separate issue, but it's important. Bias is important, and it's important to learn how to unread the media, and that's a whole um, major university required topic to undertake, and yet we don't really address it in our schooling. So I value what Tat's doing as well, because she's looking at things like manipulated graphs, the hospitals lying or manipulating data, the timeline with regard to the entry of information, statements like the reported number of of pandemic cases reaches a new height. Well, yes, it's reached a new height because every day it reaches a new height. So that's a lie as well. They state what is technically true by making it sound like it's actually worse, and in some cases they're actually lying. And of course, my presentation, which nobody wants to believe, is that the whole situation is one giant medical lie in the first instance, and that's profoundly problematic. With regard to, let me say as my side note here, people trying to rip down the president, I have stated before that I didn't believe that Trump fairly won the election. I don't really know if that's still my stance or not, but when I look at what his people at the Attorney General's office, the bar, what he said, they were right in trying to intervene in Maine with the problem with the policy relating to the alleged pandemic destroying places like campgrounds. So I do not support what's going on in the elections right now because they're interfering. The Democrats are interfering with the proper resolution of that matter, and it's not legal. And it's very dangerous to continue to lie about a pandemic simply because in other instances we failed as a culture to address other problems. It's not fair. It's not fair to an entire group of people who are being trampled, who are fearful for reasons relating to medical trauma, who shouldn't be lied to anymore and shouldn't be expected to participate. So I support, and I don't want to put words into anyone's mouth, but I support what Tat's doing. Godspeed, absolutely, and I support, definitely support what Aaron is undertaking. What I don't find it's not distressing, but I put a major bookmark on it. She's written these really interesting papers that I can't get to yet, that are academic papers that are good. Let me name three really quickly. She has a paper out there on Scientology that I think should be read and understood. There's a paper that she wrote, and I can't even remember it, but she has this chart, a very pivotal chart relating to angelology within the paper. That's a second paper. That might be part of her thesis. And then, I don't know for sure, and then the third one is a paper she wrote on Madame Blavatsky. So there's who is our originating guru, and I don't know how many people in church recognize it or not, but we are descendants of the Theosophical Society. They don't have our messenger, and we are not, we have viewpoints that vary from them theologically. We believe that we are the ultimate manifestation of the God-directed path. I think it's fair to say, whether or not we state that we believe it or not, I think that many people within CUT do believe that. But so Madame Blavatsky, the legacy that begins with her, is important. So I'd like to read that paper of Aaron's too. But presently, I am not fundraising very effectively because I don't have donors through church, even though I have friends within church. I don't have people actually handing me cash. So that's an ongoing problem. But I want to say ain't too proud to beg, because that's really that really is the situation. But I'm not sure. I don't know how to achieve leverage to get individual donations through Tithely, although they would be so welcome if you're able to make it there. I'm tax deductible because I am a church. It's called Order of Truth, and I can provide you with a link if you're interested. And my goal is to have my own individual parish so that I can do additional work as a chaplain through the military and exterior to the military too. You know, I'm not simply a proponent of the military. I defend active duty AD service members. Okay, so let's take a look and see what's happening when I can. So that's something else. If you want to support, if you have a need, or you detect a need, or you want to see God unfold the right way in the world, supporting my work is a fantastic way to do that, because I have pokers and many fires, and yet not the funding to push everything forward effectively yet. That's what we're trying to do with all this work, including with this work with regard to RC. Okay, so let's see. Okay, I'm gonna try to get there right now. With any luck, I won't time out. Last time I timed out. I wish my tech would work. Okay, well, I'm getting there. Let's go, please. Okay, I actually have to get... And I think if I could find the St. Francisco information, it would at least give, us more data in terms of lexicon. Is it called a council? What is a synod? All of those things are relevant at this juncture. But I want to point out again, as I stated before, is that it's really my goal is not to have this be a Catholic effort necessarily, but to be a joint effort between the Roman Catholic Church and CUT, which, in my view, is more satisfying when it's viewed as being Protestant. That's been my experience within it. Although we have Catholic saints, and I think there are a lot of Catholics within it, and former Catholics as well. But to see it as, I don't think it's correct. I don't want to say how other people should use it, because they should use it to facilitate their own protection and salvation. So, but for me personally, it's more interesting when you start with the premise that my prophet started as Pentecostal. I'll return. Am I properly caffeinated? Am I going to get into trouble for drinking coffee? That's my other question. Okay. This is an awesome website, Catholic Church. Okay, before I go into this, everyone's on a different learning curve. I don't possess the entirety when I speak of lexicon right. It's important that the lexicon, CUT lexicon, is supported as its own individual lexicon. Yes, it's derived from other religious sources, extant religious sources, but it's also syncretic. It's also uniquely its own path, and not simply theosophical, and not simply. And I also want to say, not simply the, I guess, the initiation of Madame Blavatsky or the Theosophists, but it's its own path, including the incorporation of 8 major world mystical paths. But certainly, it's an emanation of the will and legacy of Mark and Elizabeth Clare Prophet as well. That's also true. So we're going into here, and we're looking at Roman Catholic beliefs. Britannica, I hit Britannica again. This is going to interest some people out there, I believe. Britannica, will be interesting to people because, well, it might interest you to know. I posted something. It's funny how information comes across the system sometimes, because as someone in a position of religious authority, I think it's fair for me to say that about myself under these circumstances. You take a risk, right? Like early on, when I started posting information, I was hit, not by the church, not by Elizabeth, and not by the true hierarchy, not by the White Fire Core people. I think who have hearts that are open to children, hearts that are open to neophytes. I really do believe that, and I believe that they go out of their way in their personal social media insurance policies, if you'll permit me to say that, to ensure that people are welcomed when they need to be welcomed. And I think that, as I stated in other videos, in order to do that, you have to have you have to be deferential with regard to how you approach people. I've made the mistake in the past, and I've admitted to it, of doing what I've seen other CUT practitioners do, which is to boot out entirely in a public forum, even contrary opinions. And sometimes even the people, as I've stated before, even people who claim to be quote unquote Luciferian will come to me and have valid points. And although I differ from some of their viewpoints, I find that it's more effective to respond to them lovingly, and to see, try to forge some sort of understanding, human to human, principally. Not to mention the fact that where it is that they are seeking assistance validly, will be obscured by a CUT practitioner if that CUT practitioner annihilates the entire conversation and just eliminates that person from the topic. How do you assist someone who needs help if they're coming to you for help and you're saying, I have no help to provide to you at all if you come to me with those viewpoints? So I had to learn that. I remember, I think, 2 conversations I had where I regretted being just so rejecting topics directly out of the gate, because it closed off conversation. But it's also important for CUT practitioners to protect their own heart and their own experience, and as I stated, the church's individual identity. It's important that the lexicon be protected because it's part of the eternal truth. Which is a separate point that I want to make here with regard to canonization, is that the vital necessity of supporting the true Dharma, and the Catholic Church has a specific way of putting it, and they use Latin. So that's really great for us because it is it's a helpful way to codify our work. But Britannica, this is interesting. So I referred to Britannica one day, and then someone got on the board on a separate thread, apparently on a separate topic, but I wonder if that was just sort of God and the Elohim intervening to protect me from the reality that I was being criticized. Because if I received the criticism from church, it would sidetrack me too much, and then I can't help people if I'm sidetracked. So I wonder if it was a friend of mine in Montana who was very CUT. He's one of the most pious men that I know, who has written on the topic of Luther very effectively. But someone came on his board and said, if you're posting links to Britannica, how can we believe you? If you're, and I think that it was referring to me, or it's possible that it was, or that it's also possible that someone at CUT just had their own link to Britannica. But the criticism was against someone at church putting a reference to the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is a non-religious encyclopedia, on the board and using it as a citation for and citing it as a holy text. I cite whatever I'd like as holy text because I believe that that's Jesus' experience. Jesus had to make it in the world. Can you imagine being Jesus and having to live in material reality, having to be down here in duality? It's really that as he walks the path to save you, he is encountering, what it is that he encounters in the newspaper. He's encountering what it is that he encounters in the non-religious sources, such as encyclopedias and academic texts. All of these things. Yeah, sure, we see it as being back in biblical days and so forth, but Jesus is alive and among us now. So the Word is really, and including religious texts, because the religious texts have an aura of being special, and the gods relate to that, and Alpha and Omega relate to that, and Mother relates to that. The sutras, the holy sutras, and so on. Those are incredibly valuable too, but so as a reference from the Encyclopedia Britannica. So I did take exception, but it's interesting to look at because it is indicative of the varying viewpoints between standard Buddhism, for instance, where they want everything to be coming out of a lama. Or a lamasery, and they want everything to be, coming out of their traditional discourses. But the reality is, Jesus wasn't simply Buddhist. Jesus he was not also simply Jewish, not in the typical sense. So to say that what is true must be, and by Jesus I do mean Tiferet as well. I mean the perfect man, and. So, Encyclopedia Britannica, gee, if Jesus read it, there must have been something holy within it. It must have contained a holy text, at least in that moment, for Jesus. Having walked the perfect path that arose, that resulted in people's salvation. So, don't knock it because it's not coming out of a 14th century lamasery or, the early mind-rolling schools. Definitely understand that information arises from multiple sources. But so we're here at Britannica once again. Okay, so canonization, and of course I will take you to our encyclopedia too, which is amazing, and TSL Encyclopedia Online is just an incredible resource. But they're saying canonization is an official act of a Christian communion, mainly the Roman Catholic Church, but also the Eastern Orthodox Church, declaring one of its deceased members worthy of public cult, okay, note that word, public cult, and entering his or her name in the canon or authorized list of that communion's recognized saints. And then what we're looking at is a photograph of Pope Francis being driven in St. Peter's Square in the Pope Mobile. The Pope Mobile at this point, is it entirely encased? It doesn't look like it's entirely enclosed. I can't quite tell it, but there's a front shield to it that's bulletproof plexiglass going that curves over. It's not flat, it's curvilinear. It goes in this direction over him. And I imagine that either the window is rolled down or I'm not seeing properly when I look there. But there's a reference, if you read Lipo, I can't get anybody in church yet, but he will become important down the line because he made a lot of really interesting insights and was studied directly at the ranch under Viruma. He also refers to a point in time at which, when Elizabeth would go out in California, she had to speak from behind what they referred to as bulletproof glass. At least at one point they did. So, Mother had bulletproof shielding. The Pope has bulletproof shielding. Most people, many people in COT probably require it, and so on. Let's see what else is going on here. Okay, so that's just Britannica. My nose itches. Okay, John the 15th. I don't know who that is. Okay. Okay, click out of this. Go away. History. What I like to go through and hope, with any luck, I'm not stumbling over pronunciation. So that's an issue, and I know that's not important, and I've had people point out to me, I don't know, like sometimes I think it's okay to be from another part of the world or another part of the the galaxy in which it's pronounced Rinpoche and not Rinpoche. But, and generally put, I'd like to be able to adhere to standards. My understanding is that it's Kaju and not Kagyu, and I think very few people would know that unless you're in a Kaju Buddhist. Okay, history. In the early church, there was no formal canonization, but the cult of local martyrs was widespread and was regulated by the bishop of the diocese. So that's how this all began. The translation of the martyrs' remains from the place of burial to a church was equivalent to canonization. Gradually, ecclesiastical authorities intervened more directly in the process of canonization. By the 10th century, appeals were made to the Pope. The first saint canonized by a pope was Ulrich, or Ulrich, one of those things I'd have to look up, Bishop of Augsburg, who died in 1973 and was canonized by Pope John the 15th at the Lateran Council of 993. Pope Alexander III, 1159 to 81, began to reserve the cases of canonization to the Holy See, and this became general law under Gregory IX, 1227 to 41. Continuing this paragraph, Pope Sixtus V, 1585 to 1590, assigned to the Congregation of Rites one of the offices of the Roman Curia, the duty of conducting the processes of beatification, that is a first step toward canonization, whereby limited public veneration is permitted, and canonization. In the following century, Pope Urban VIII forbade the public cult of any person not as yet beatified or canonized by the Church. Exception was made only for those who were in possession of public cult from time immemorial or for at least 100 years. So cult, interesting term. Very interesting term. Let me give you my take on 4 different meanings of the word cult. Most people think of bad cults, bad actors, running religious groups and causing things like mass suicide. When I think of cult, the first thing I think of is Heaven's Gate, which I will tell you about them separately, or Order of the whatever star, the folks who are related to the Borne sunglasses company in France who were found in having committed suicide, allegedly, according to the papers and so forth. That's tragic, or the markings of tragedy, I imagine. But there are also cults. Erin said in her work, a cult can also mean a religious movement in its first generation. So when a cult is because there's an NRM, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, the first person really doing this sort of thing. Although it is a cult in that respect, because right, the messengership of Elizabeth Clare Prophet is viewed as being different from any particular legacy. But my belief and what I've learned as formal information, although I don't know how widespread the understanding is within the church, which is interesting too. I'll also bookmark that. The legacy from Madame Blavatsky going down through the various inheritors of the dispensation is notable too, because we used to be really, in a way, because Mark Prophet was involved in it, we were before CUT and the Summit Lighthouse, which are essentially synonymous, although there are slight differences between those two organizations, were affiliated with the Bridge to Freedom. And before them, it was the Saint Germain Foundation directly before them, I believe, unless I have that wrong. Bridge to Freedom. Yeah, it was SGF before. It would have been Guy and Edna Ballard before Bridge to Freedom. So not everybody knows about that, but cult in that she's the messenger and so forth, and that, yeah, I understand what that means as well. And then cult, where you don't want to be in a cult, that's another one. That's another meaning. Also, but for what I learned, and I wanted to try to enhance what Erin's teaching as well, the cult back in the day, in Greco-Roman times, were also religious groups where there'd be like a central seer, or you'd go and you'd see the lady giving the channeling, basically channeling a god, after making your sacrifice of wheat or whatever it was that they were doing. And you'd go into a location, stone enclosed location, and talk to, I think they were called Sophias, and probably some of them were men as well. And those were cults, but not cult as in Jonestown, but cult as in cult devoted to Demeter, or a cult devoted to Osiris, the Greco-Roman gods. That's a third meaning of the word cult. But what's the new meaning that I'm uncovering in this determinative process is cult is also within the Roman Catholic Church, when it naturally arises from a group of Catholic people who have decided that someone who has passed is a saint, or who behave as if someone who has passed is a saint, and it becomes interesting to the church for that reason. I had no idea really before reading this. I mean, you would think that it would maybe go that way, but it's what it's saying here, and they're called public cults. But so at Pope Urban VIII forbade the public cult of any person not as yet beatified or canonized by the Church. Exception was made only for those who were in possession of public cult from time immemorial, or for at least 100 years. So then it goes to process. The legislation of Pope Urban VIII, together with later legislation by Pope Benedict XIV, formed the basis of the procedures for beatification and canonization found in the Code of Canon Law, promulgated in 1917 of the Roman Catholic Church. Two types of beatification and canonization are distinguished by the Code: formal or ordinary, and extraordinary or equivalent. So you have ordinary beatification and canonization on one hand, and extraordinary on the other. I have no idea what that means yet. We speak in terms of ordinary time, or they speak in terms of ordinary time at the Catholic Church, but that seems different here. Equivalent is the same as extraordinary according to the RC process. The Roman Catholic Determinative Process says extraordinary and equivalent. Okay, so beatification. Formal beatification has entailed 4 general steps: an informative process, introduction of the cause, the apostolic process, and 4 definite judgments. The first of these steps was under the jurisdiction of the bishop in whose diocese it took place, and the other 3 were directly under the jurisdiction of the Congregation of Rites and the Pope. In the late 1960s, Pope Paul VI announced that the process of beatification and canonization would be shortened and decentralized, and he established a new congregation administrative division of the Curia to handle such processes. Diocesan, provincial, or regional courts would conduct the entire investigation in consultation with the Vatican. Thus, duplication would be avoided and less time needed to complete the process. In general, the process of documenting the sanctity of a holy man or woman cannot begin until 5 years after death, though this waiting period can be waived by the Pope. Interesting. Pope John Paul II, for example, waived 3 years of the waiting period for the cause of Mother Teresa, and Pope Benedict XVI waived the entire waiting period for his predecessor, John Paul II, much to Guru Ma's delight, as I've mentioned in other videos. Elizabeth Clare Prophet adored John Paul II. The subsequent investigation of the candidate involves the gathering together of all material pertaining to the candidate's reputation for sanctity or heroic virtue, the writings of the candidate, and information about miracles performed by the candidate either during his or her lifetime or after death. The miracle required for beatification can be waived in the case of martyrdom. Very interesting point. Okay, be right back. I would put you guys on pause, except I'm not sure that my software is going to enable me to do that. Regrets for that. I'm missing so many things, but okay, so we're going to go over here and try to get back into what I was doing. So I think it's the case that if you're a martyr, am I still on? I hope so. Okay, good. If you're a martyr, you're not expected to have performed miracles. Is that what it means? I guess the giving of one's life is enough of a miracle, possibly.